After running without any spectators in 2020, the Melbourne Cup will return to normal-ish again this year on November 2nd. 10,000 people will be allowed to attend Flemington Racecourse this year for the Race That Stops a Nation. But even with the added excitement of a comeback event, it does kind of feel like attitudes towards the Cup are changing. Boycott movements are really starting to gain some traction over the past few years. In 2019, the ABC broadcast a shocking report exposing the treatment of horses within the Australian horse racing industry. And in the same year, there was a peak in Google searches for Nup to the Cup, an anti-racing campaign that actually started way back in 2011. So is the Melbourne Cup actually becoming less popular, or does it just feel that way? And is outrage over the treatment of horses enough to actually stop the race for good? The answer to both of those questions is in the numbers. When it comes to popularity, we can break it down into two segments. How many people actually go to the race at Flemington and how many people just watch it on TV. The number of people actually getting frocked up and attending the Melbourne Cup has been in decline for years, like serious decline. According to Flemington's own data, around 81,000 people attended the Melbourne Cup race in 2019. That is the third lowest attendance since 1980. And that's not an outlier year, it's part of a clear downwards trend. Attendance has dropped every single year since 2010, apart from two small bumps in 2012 and 2015. In the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a real boom in popularity. Attendance actually peaked in 2003 when around 122,000 people attended Cup Day. But now we're back down to numbers that were similar to the early 80s, so literally 40 years ago. Does this mean that more people are watching the Melbourne Cup on TV instead? Well, not really. Nobody could actually go to the Cup in 2020, so you would expect that TV audiences would be at an all-time high. But there were actually fewer people watching than there were in 2019. Here's a quick snapshot of the TV audience numbers for the past few years. 1.8 million people watched in 2018. 1.4 million people watched in 2019 and 1.3 million people watched in 2020. The decline in TV viewers hasn't been quite as steady as the drop in attendance, but it's still pretty significant. In 2015, more than 2 million people watched the Melbourne Cup on TV, and that was already the lowest number since 2001, and it's even lower now. There are some small caveats around how we've pulled and compared these numbers, so I really recommend checking out the article in the notes, which shows you all of the details and the reference links. But essentially, the takeaway is this. The Melbourne Cup has lost 750,000 TV viewers in just 5 years, and that's a lot. So why is such an iconic Australian event just bleeding racegoers and TV viewers every single year? There are two key reasons. The most obvious factor is the increasing awareness around the animal cruelty and treatment of horses within the racing industry. Since 2013, 6 horses have died as a direct result of the Melbourne Cup. And like we're seeing in many other areas of social change, people are using social media and digital platforms to really drive awareness and make some noise about these deaths. Previously, traditional media outlets really haven't focused on horse deaths in their coverage of the Melbourne Cup. It was treated as this dark, kind of behind the scenes secret of what was otherwise just a very glamorous and bougie sort of day. Another reason that Aussies are losing interest in the Cup is because of our changing national identity. The very first Melbourne Cup was run in 1861. Australia didn't even become one nation until 1901. And so this horse race is essentially 40 years older than our system of government. There is a really great article on The Guardian about the origins of the Melbourne Cup and how it became a really important part of Australian culture. The journalist Calla Walquist explains that at a higher level, horse racing plays into the celebration of our Anglo-Saxon heritage and narratives around purity of blood. That version of Australia becomes less relevant as the nation becomes more multicultural. And in turn, that makes the Melbourne Cup less representative of what makes Australia great. After 160 years, it's not surprising that this very old horse race no longer suits the idea of who we think we are anymore. And because of that, it's losing cultural relevance. But here's the thing. Despite the Melbourne Cup losing popularity, it's not going to be stopped anytime soon because it makes heaps of money. According to the Victorian Racing Committee's annual reports, the 2018 Melbourne Cup generated almost $450 million in gross economic benefit for the state of Victoria. That's a big increase from $388 million in 2015. So they're actually making more money despite fewer people actually participating in this. For comparison, let's look at another massive sporting event held in Melbourne, the Australian Open. In 2019, the tennis Grand Slam brought in $347 million in gross economic benefit for Victoria, and the Melbourne Cup brought in $100 million more than that. It's just no contest. Then there is the gambling side of things. Obviously, gambling contributes a significant amount to horse racing and also just the economy as a whole. In 2019, we collectively bet $106 million on the Melbourne Cup race alone. And for the entire 2018-2019 racing season, the gambling industry hit a record $1.5 billion in turnover. But that's just one state. On a national level, the gambling industry turnover for 2019 was $36 billion. And 54% of that comes from horse racing. Again, this is all despite the shrinking interest in the one race that actually brings in interest from outside of the typical horse racing crowd. It just proves that if anything could bring an end to the Melbourne Cup, it won't be the declining popularity. It has to be the money. So now that you know the facts and figures behind the Melbourne Cup, I'm really curious, did any of the numbers surprise you? I love hearing what young people think about the really interesting topics that we get to discuss on Zee Feed, so leave a comment and let me know what you think. And if you'd like to see more explainer videos just like this from Zee Feed, you can help us grow by sharing this video with a friend, checking out the website, and don't forget to subscribe.